Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for those in attendance and those listening and watching at home. My name is Brendan Carty. I'm a member of the Cornwall Board of Education. I'm also the chair of the board's communication committee, which is putting on this event tonight. I want to thank my other communication committee members, Christine Diaz and Lou Arginio, who have helped craft everything that you've seen going out to the school district this year regarding either forums or newsletters, things like that. I also want to thank our central administration team, specifically Terry Dade, our superintendent, and our assistant superintendent for business, Harvey Sotland, not only putting together the budget itself, but helping to put together the presentation that you're about to see tonight. So about tonight, I just want to go through some high-level thoughts about the budget process, the numbers that you'll see in the voting booth, so you'll understand them, what the programs are that are being added, and what impact it has on your taxes, and a little word about the long-term picture with the district's long-term planning, excuse me. So we'll start with that budget overview. These are the numbers that you're going to see in the different documentation that has either been mailed or when you go into the ballot box. So the proposed budget, this is the overall operating budget. This is how much money it would take under this proposed budget to operate all of our programs next year. That's $90 million, $260,000 and change. That represents a budget-to-budget increase of a little over $3 million, which is a 3.46% increase over last year. Now, mind you, that 3.46% is not a 3.46% increase in your taxes. That's just the increase of the overall budget number. We'll get into the tax levy in a second and what is comprised of that 3.46. So the projected tax levy, just below, is $52.46 million. That is a projected tax levy increase of 1.72%. In layman's terms, under this proposed budget, property taxes would be increasing by 1.72% per household. Important to note that the maximum allowable tax levy increase, in other words, the state mandated tax cap, this year is calculated at 3.12%. So that 1.72 is well below the tax cap. It's a little over half that tax cap. And in Cornwall, we try never to approach the tax cap. This year was no different, but I think it's always a good metric to see what was allowable versus what we went with. The fund balance that would be used towards this year's budget, which is essentially money that goes against the tax levy. So that fund balance helps lower the tax levy increase. The projected use of that fund balance is about $2.8 million. Now let's focus a little bit on that 3.46% increase. So this is the increase, the year-to-year increase in the overall operating budget number. So what's driving that increase? Why is the operating budget 3.46% higher than it was last year? The most important factor is that first one, the increase in baked-in costs. This is just the increase of year-to-year costs for things like our contractually obligated salaries for all of our employees, transportation, utilities, et cetera. We'll get more into the details of all of those items in a second, but that's the first bucket, and that is the most significant. Second factor are new positions and expenses, which, again, we will get into in a moment. So here's a breakdown of those increased baked-in costs. So one of the big drivers there right off the bat is salaries and pensions. That's over $800,000. Again, these are unavoidable increases. Once the contracts are set, then you have obligations under those contracts to meet increasing salaries and pensions. So that's a chunk there. Same thing with health insurance. There's a $960,000 increase over last year. That represents about a 9% increase in 1 year. So that's a sizable chunk. Student transportation is another $430,000. We're in year 2 of a 5-year contract with West Point Tours. So that is, again, another contractual obligation. Utilities went up slightly, but still $8,000 due to the inflationary pressures that I think we're all familiar with. Occupational education went up $260,000. That's an increase in both student participation and tuition costs. We had to pay about $270,000 to debt service, which includes the principal and interest on outstanding borrowings that whether it's a bond or another initiative that we've taken out in the past. That contractual supplies, equipment, it's a big umbrella. It includes a lot of things that, any supplies or equipment that we have to purchase to maintain our facilities, but it also covers a lot of the shared services that we get through BOCES. So that's going up $220,000. A big chunk of that, BOCES, if you recall, Orange-Ulster County BOCES approved a capital project last year, which we have to, as a component school district, we have to pay our share, essentially, and that's roughly $100,000 of that. So represents a good chunk of that increase as well. We do benefit from some decreases, like our out-of-district special education tuition actually went down almost $70,000. The cost of, let's call it non-health insurance, so all of this big bucket that includes general liability, commercial property, commercial inland marine, et cetera, all of those, the overall cost went down about $66,000. And then the money that we transferred to capital, although we did transfer a sizable portion, is about $317,000 less than we transferred last year. So it still represents a year-to-year decrease. Overall, those additions and subtractions comes out to about $2.56 million increase over last year's. Okay. Now that $2.56 million is part of what's called the rollover budget. This is a term that you've probably heard if you follow the budget creation process. The rollover budget is essentially you take all the programs and obligations from last year, you roll it over into this year, and then that's whatever increase that comes with is just the cost of essentially staying open. So it would cost the district an extra $2.56 million based on those contractual increases to simply continue our current program next school year. All right, then there was that second item that would explain the 3.46% year-to-year increase, and that's new positions and expenses. So this gets down to the budget creation process at the building level. Each year, teachers, staff, department heads, principals, they identify a list of needs. We call this the needs assessment list. And for things to make it on that list, they need to hit certain criteria. One of them is, are they affecting student outcomes? Are they improving student outcomes and achievements? Is it the best way to address them? And what would it cost to reach those objectives? Initially, that initial list came out to a little bit over $1 million worth of needs. But in light of economic conditions as they are, and this year's state aid numbers, which not only were less than initially expected, but I'll get into in more detail in a second, the Central Administration and Board of Education decided to whittle that needs list down to just 4 important items. So going from that $1 million down to what you're about to see. All right, so these are the 4 items that were decided to, that made it through the process and were included on that final needs assessment, which are now part of this proposed budget. Top of the list, a full-time elementary school teacher, a full-time high school business teacher, 20 additional seats to our universal pre-K program, and then a new and updated sound system in the high school auditorium. I'm going to get into those in detail in a second, but for now, just know those 4 items amount to about $455,000. Okay, so each of those items one at a time. Why do we need these positions? So the full-time elementary school teacher. This teacher would be hired here. We are currently standing in Cornwall Elementary School Lee Road. So the teacher would be hired at Lee Road. Wait to catch up. Sorry. Teacher would be hired at CES to help address the increased elementary enrollment numbers that we've seen over the past few years. There's been what we've called an enrollment bump that has been going specifically through the elementary. And in order to address that, this full-time elementary teacher would give CES enough personnel to create 5 classes at each level. I'm going to skip out the mics here. Okay, yeah, they were much better. I sound much more official this way. So yeah, this new teacher would allow us to increase the number of classes to 5 per grade. So instead of having each year to mix and match and take one teacher out of this grade and put it into that grade to absorb that bubble, CES would be able to absorb the increased enrollment numbers evenly across grades and maintain its ideal teacher to student ratio. That full-time high school business teacher. So earlier this year, the state education department sent out let's call it a memo, signaling its intent to make financial literacy a graduation requirement in the near future for all New York State high school students. So wanting to get ahead of this trend, and also to provide all the benefits that a high school business teacher would provide in terms of financial decision-making, the district's proposed budget would create a new position for a business teacher at the high school. That third item was the 20 additional seats for universal pre-K. This is a program now that we've had for a few years. When it was first approved, we had 60 seats. Then last year, we approved the creation of 20 more. And this would be the creation of 20 additional to bring us up to 100 total. We've really just been tracking demand here. So not wanting to overshoot, create seats that don't get filled. So we base this a lot on the numbers that come in from the first request that goes out, Terry, I believe in January. So once we get those numbers in, it works out well for our budget creation schedule, because then we get to see what the actual demand is for the upcoming year. So demand was coming in higher than it was last year, which makes sense. I think the program is just getting a better foothold in the community, and more people are aware of it. So this budget would fund 20 additional seats so that 100 students could enter the UPK program next year. I would add, this is a cost-effective way of doing this. The state provides more than 50% of funding for these seats. They do not provide 100%, so it's then up to the district to match the rest of the funding. But it is a cost-effective way of educating 20 more for, I'd say, 4-year-olds or UPK demographic. Final need or final position or expense, replacing the sound system in the high school auditorium. So that's actually the original sound system from when the high school was built over 20 years ago. Anybody who does anything with technology knows that 20 years is a very long time for any sort of technological system. So what we have now is an outdated system. It often fails during performances. Sometimes microphones go out, sometimes they pop, sometimes there's just a lot of interference. It's very difficult to maintain as well because the technology is just well beyond its usable life. So this year's proposed budget would replace it with a modern system that would start fresh and improve the experience for anybody that walks into that auditorium, whether it's for a performance, an assembly, a ceremony for the next generation. So those are the items in the budget, both rollover and new items, which brings us to funding. Just how are we paying for this? So there was an unexpected challenge this year in the budget creation process. Kind of alluded to it before, and that was with the state government. New York State government altered its education funding formula. So less money was flowing to many school districts than expected. There's something called foundation aid, which is based on a formula, the foundation aid formula. And during the budget creation process, the numbers were tweaked. Long story short, the governor was attempting to redistribute money, funds, so that school districts whose enrollment was actually going down in recent years got less money. So that money was essentially tied to whatever the enrollment was in districts. Problem was that this was, it just opened up, I think, a can of worms that became very difficult to calculate mid-stride in a budget creation process. So school districts just didn't know what to expect. There was an expectation based on past practice, and then suddenly the whole formula was up in the air. So a lot of districts received less money than they even received last year. We were in a position where we received less money than we expected to, and what we would have expected to based on the foundation formula. We did receive more aid, but it wasn't what we initially had projected, which created some problems with planning. The question then became, how can we cover these increased costs, the year-to-year baked-in costs, and fund these new positions and expenses in this challenging environment? I'll say, just as context, our central administration team did a wonderful job preparing for this. This was the fact that we were able to absorb this uncertainty and add these new positions and keep all of our programs, frankly, is a testament to their ability to plan conservatively with our finances, but also always have contingency plans ready to go should something unexpected happen. This year was no different. What we ended up doing was essentially two things for funding this budget. Number one, applying $2.8 million of fund balance towards the tax levy. That essentially lowers the tax burden for each individual homeowner. And then in concert with a modest tax increase, that 1.72% increase that we mentioned, that was able to bridge the gap so that we were able to do all of those things that I mentioned, maintaining our programs and adding those four key positions and expenses. All right, so what is the tax impact? Said this number a bunch of times, the 1.72%, that is the increase in the tax levy. Just some context around that. Again, it's below the maximum allowable tax increase of 3.12%. It is in line with the average annual increase here in Cornwall over the last 10 years. And as you'll see in a second, it's less than the tax levy increase for a lot of our surrounding school districts. And I don't mean to show this comparison to brag, but just I think it's good to see perspective for how we in Cornwall have dealt with this uncertain environment and how others, the choices that others have been, frankly, forced to make. We'll start, though, with that average increase here in Cornwall. So that's the 10-year average. Not going to go through each number, but it's gone up and down throughout the years. That 0% was when we did the capital bond. So the budget itself had a 0% increase that year. Overall, it averages out to 1.66% over the last 10 years. So this coming in at 1.72 is about as close to a statistical tie as you can get. So we're right there with where we would expect to be historically. And this is where we are compared to surrounding districts. You'll see a number that are in the high threes and then all the way down into the twos. At 172, I think we are favorably positioned compared to our neighbors. And again, a lot of this has to do just with the uncertainty that came down, and without many good options, many districts chose to simply raise the tax levy more than they would normally in order to, for the most part, just keep their programs, and then certainly if they wanted to add anything else. All right, so how much does that equate to like per household? So if you have a $250,000 house, that's market value, it's a $76 increase over the year, which averages out to $6 a month. And then you can follow the rest of them there. $350,000 house, it's $106 per year, $9 per month. And then at $450, $136 per year, and $11 per month. Again, if these numbers are familiar, as you saw in one of the previous slides, that's because it's very much in line with what the increases have been year to year over the last decade. All right, so an important question to always ask and absorb is what happens if the budget is voted down? So if on May 21st, which is when the election is occurring, if the voters do not approve of this proposed budget, then the Board of Education would have two choices. First, it could hold a second budget vote. Now, under this scenario, the board could either keep the budget exactly as is and just roll that out a second time and just hope that more people came out to vote for it, or the board could submit a revised budget. You technically could revise it any way that you wanted, but the idea there would be to probably lower it to a closer to a 0% increase. Or number two, you could adopt a contingency budget. Under this scenario, you wouldn't mess around with a second vote. You would just adopt what's called a contingency budget. But what is a contingency budget? It's just a financial term, essentially, for a budget with a 0% tax increase. So this year's tax levy would have to be equal to last year's tax levy, which maybe on its face doesn't sound so bad because you think, oh, okay, we just essentially hold serve from last year. But remember what we talked about just a few minutes ago. The issue with that is that this year's budget has a lot more expenses than last year's budget. Things have gotten more expensive. Our contracts require us to spend more on salaries and things like that. So things would need to be cut. It wouldn't just be we repeat last year. In order to get the levy back down to what it was last year, we would actually have to make the budget itself, the programs themselves, smaller. Under a contingent budget, you might ask, well, how much smaller? We would have to cut $902,000 and $902,117 to be exact. Just to walk you through like how much that really entails. Remember the spending additions that I mentioned, that the elementary school teacher, business school teacher, the UPK, the sound system, that only equaled $455,000. So even if you just remove the new spending, you would still need to come up with an additional $466,000 from the district's existing programs and services. That's a sizable chunk. And reducing the budget by that amount would have an unavoidable impact on all aspects of our academics, arts, and athletic programs. I know that's an uncomfortable thing to consider, and I certainly wish there would be a way to reduce that amount without touching those essential programs, but the mathematical reality is out of a budget that has 77% of its spending just on our programming, it's unavoidable. That's far too much to make up just around the edges. All right, but that's only if the budget goes down. So I think it's, again, important to understand that context before you vote. But if that were the case, then certainly the Board of Education would have a lot to consider. Don't want to end on a down note, though. One more thing about this year's budget and where we fit into the long-term, like bigger picture. So if you recall, 2 years ago, voters approved the creation of a new $5 million capital reserve fund that would be used toward infrastructure repairs in a future capital project. This was on the same ballot for the capital project itself. One of the, I think it was the third or fourth proposal was the creation of a new $5 million reserve fund, which was approved. And over the last few years, we have been filling it. Every dollar in that fund gets matched by roughly $3 in state aid. So you put $1 million in, you can pay for a $4 million project because the state would fund 75% of it. The fund is currently at $3,100,000, which means we are getting closer and closer to that goal of $5 million. Once it reaches $5 million, you can't put a single dollar in over it. You have to use it. It's there for that purpose, to be used. But once that fund does reach that $5 million, the district will be able to tackle a new $20 million capital project, similar to last time, where we wouldn't have to raise local school taxes because we would already have that $5 million portion to contribute up front. So, yes, the budget does some great things for this year or for this coming year, but I think it's also important to remember where we are in the longer picture too. It's we're inching closer to taking another big chunk out of the all of those infrastructure projects that the district has been trying to tackle essentially for at least a generation. All right, so what is the takeaway? Trying to fit this all in one sentence. Despite getting less aid than expected from New York State, this budget preserves all of our programming and addresses important needs while keeping taxes low and making a significant contribution to our long-term goals. Now, voting. When and where? So it is next Tuesday, so we're standing here on Wednesday, May 15th. So in 6 days, Tuesday, May 21st, 6 a.m., polls open till 9. That's at the Cornwall Central Middle School Gymnasium. For those that don't know the address, it's right on Main Street here in the town of Cornwall. And who can vote? Anyone who lives in the Cornwall Central School District can vote. It doesn't matter if it doesn't have to be the town of Cornwall, it doesn't have to be COH. So if you are in Cornwall, COH, the parts of New Windsor, Highland Mills, or Woodbury that are within the Cornwall Central School District, and you are a registered voter, you are eligible to vote. Again, one more very clear visual reminder to please vote Tuesday, May 21st. If you have to, call friends, tell them about it. I know this is one of those things that can sneak up on you and slip by, so make a plan for voting. We're going to be open all day, anytime before work, after work, pick up the kids from school, etc. Just stop in. All right, with that, I will open it to any questions from the audience.
Great. Yeah. Just any chance we could have, early voting? Seems like having 1 day, 3 hours, tight window, tough to do with everybody's schedules. Hadn't even really thought of it till now, but in the future, I think that'd be helpful.
I can address that. There is a new provision starting this year that you can early vote, not at the polls, but in a paper ballot, and it does count. So that information's online on the district's website. Absolutely.
I understand this may be a detailed question, but just curious, how does universal pre-K affect the foundation model that they have to assist with the state funding?
So the foundation aid formula is going to fold into the money that we have available to address all the needs in the district. So UPK doesn't directly impact negatively or positively. It's just what we decided as a community to invest in. Like Mr. Carty said, there is an advantage to continuing to add seats like we have over the past 2 years, because there's a tiered system of how much funding we get back from the state. So this is one of those items where we actually do get some state support in addition to foundation aid to open more and more UPK seats.
In order for the budget to pass, 50% plus one. So if we were, yeah, that's a great question. So if we were, if we had, the proposed budget was exceeding the tax cap, which is currently 3.12%, we would need 60% plus one. But because it's under the tax cap, just a simple majority is required.
So I think this is for Harvey. I saw the 10-year model. It was like 1.6% or over the. I know we're offsetting some of those with the fund balance. Is there any concern that we're offsetting it with the fund balance every year to stay under 2% or 3%, where 5 years from now, all of a sudden it's going to be, oh, shoot, now we have to go up 8%? Or is the long-term projections look pretty good? I guess?
No, good question. That, the amount of money that we use, that we assign, it's called assigned fund balance, that essentially comes from the surplus that's generated or is left over each year. One might ask, why do we keep having these surpluses? Why don't we just lower the taxes? The reason is because a school district is very dynamic, okay? Things change on a daily level. And we have to budget very conservatively, like as if the dark clouds over the district every single day. And it's like the 100-year flood. It's not going to happen every year, so we will have that surplus. But as you can see here, we give it back, okay? So if we were ever in a situation where we felt that this would no longer be that amount or even that level, we would have to adjust accordingly with the budget that we put forth.
Oh, I think I'm done after this. So there's no benefit to going up to 3% or 2.5% to build in any cushion for future years, because it's already kind of being done, I guess, is what I'm reading into that?
Well, the levy itself, you're talking?
Yes.
No, the tax levy is what the local, it's the local share, it's what you as the taxpayers bear. Just to increase that for the sake of a
Well, I'm sure
cushion.
I guess I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'm sure that somewhere in the needs analysis, someone's going to say, like, I'm sure all the teachers would love another teacher, or, you know, the cabinets need to be fit. I know some of that was on the capital project. but
Right.
I'm sure there's some need that just barely didn't make the cut. So would have been maybe, all right, instead of being 1.72 or whatever the number was, it's 1.85, then maybe we don't need to, either we have something else to add or save some of the reserves for future
Right.
years.
And that was a discussion that the board had. And we just have to be responsible and, you know, we have to balance what the taxpayers can afford and what we can afford. So it's a delicate balance each year that the board has a lengthy conversation on.
Okay, thank you.
And I would add too, just about like the whole rainy day, you know, you need it for the rainy day kind of scenario. Quite literally, there was a, keep me honest on this, Harvey, but there was an incident where we had to repair the roof at, was it the middle school or? It was the middle school,
You're talking way long time ago?
like 5 years ago.
Yes.
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 And that, so that you do have incidents that happen where
Right.
you need to fix some, you can't wait for the budget cycle. You need to fix something that
Right.
weekend in order to open school.
Right.
And because of that, we had the funds on hand and we were able to do it.
Right.
But to Harvey's point, you know, yeah, you might not need it whatever percentage of years, but when you do, if you don't, then you're in a very difficult situation. You're going to have to answer some very tough questions. And because our school district does have a lot of infrastructure needs that it's on its plate, the likelihood of those kinds of scenarios are not out of the realm of possibility.
Back to this absentee or early voting. So on the page, there's two forms, absentee and early voting. Which one do we use for what?
Sure. So those are the applications. It's important to note, they're not the ballot itself. You're required to fill out an application, and then we give you the ballot as long as the application is vetted. It's an interesting question. If you're going to be out of the county, or we have a lot of absentee individuals who just can't make it to the polls, maybe they're in an assisted living home, they do the absentee ballot, okay? Because they're absent from the ability. The early voting can really be anybody. It's just earlier that you can pick it up. There is overlap, okay? If someone came in and they said, which one can I have? Either one, depending on it. The state didn't delineate saying, we're going to do away with absentee ballot and just go with this. It's really very overlapping.
Thanks. I just didn't want to come with the wrong form.
No,
then.
it's a good question.
You can do it the same day, right? You hand in your form and then you can fill out your ballot?
Yes. In fact, You could pick up the application or print it offline, bring the application in, we will look at it, make sure it's just, and we can give you the ballot right there. If you want, you can actually go over in the corner, fill it out, seal it, sign it, and give it to us right there.
Couldn't be any easier.
We try.
Because you can
The
email it.
district office.
If I have a college kid, so it would be absentee, so obviously they're not coming in person to hand it in.
Right.
So we can do this all over email?
Well, you can't, we have to have the physical, so the application has to be signed, as well as the ballot has to be signed. by
Original
them.
signature.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's still time. You could expedite it if you.
Anybody else? No. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for attending and the wonderful questions. Anybody who has been watching online or watches this in the next few days, if you have questions, you can always email the board or email the central administration. We'll be happy to get back to you. Just one final reminder, Tuesday, May 21st, that's next week, Cornwall Central Middle School, 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. For any further updates, we encourage you to follow our website or the Board of Ed Facebook page where we share information regarding this year's budget. Thank you again, and see you all on Tuesday.